I'm the Director of Events and Education for Trade Press Media Group, and you're here to join today's discussion, Facilities Evolution, Maintenance Technology Innovations. Our panelists today include Ron Schaefer from Salto and Katie Gramaja from Brightly. Before we get much deeper into the content, I want to cover a few housekeeping details. We talked about them a little bit as you were coming into the space. It's that Q&A portion of our conversation that's really important to getting your questions answered and giving our speakers a sense of really what's on your mind so we can best meet your information needs. To submit your questions, go ahead and navigate to that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Type in your questions as they come to you at any time. We'll get to as many as time permits. And at the conclusion of today's webcast, you're going to receive an email with a link to an online assessment, a couple of questions that are centered around what was covered today. And upon successful completion of those assessment questions, we'll be sending you your CEU certificate. We will also archive this event at facilitiesnet.com/webcasts. So let's talk about what our learning objectives are today. We're going to learn how to identify and implement digital and cloud-based tools, discover how to use accurate data to eliminate biases, justify budget requests, and address complaints effectively. Put a pin in that one. We're going to be talking about the data role quite a bit today, I think. We're going to gain insights on strategic asset management, another big item that we'd like to tackle in terms of prioritizing preventive maintenance, making sure we are driving towards sustainability and efficiencies, and then exploring methods to enhance occupant satisfaction. This is a big one as well, balancing security with convenience and optimizing function of the whole facility. All right, so we're going to learn a little bit more about our panelists today. First, meet Ron Schaefer. He leads Salto's Education Solutions business practice with a focus on aligning their innovative access control technology and hardware with current market needs and future demands of next-gen educational facilities. He's got a lot on his plate. Ron is an access control expert. He's also an industry veteran, and he's passionate about security and safety in schools. And he's driven to identify technologies and products that keep students, faculty, and staff safe. Katie Gramajo is an APA certified educational facilities professional. So she's been right there in the trenches. Currently, she's serving as the Senior Industry Marketing Manager in Education at Brightly Software by Siemens. Prior to her current position, she spent almost 7 years at the Windward School with multiple campuses in White Plains and Manhattan, New York, where she served as the Director of Operations. Finally, I'd like to say a big thank you to our sponsors, Brightly and Salto Systems. We appreciate your support of this really important conversation. So we're going to get started with our discussion. And first, what I'd like to do is invite Katie to open with an overview of Brightly Software, your role there, and how those two overlap.
Thanks for having me, Wendy. So as you said, I first worked in schools and facilities. I started in schools in 2012 at Campbell Hall, which is a private school K through 12 in Los Angeles. And that's where I actually first met Brightly Software. The sales representative that I met is still working for Brightly. So we have since reconnected when I was hired. And it was formerly called School Dude. So if you are in education, you probably know it as School Dude or Dude Solutions. So I had learned about it then and used the software. And it's the first software that was specifically targeted for schools for facilities management, and since has been expanded to multiple verticals, so healthcare, manufacturing, government, and many others. But schools where we started, we have about 7,000 schools, colleges, universities, K through 12, and higher ed. And our goal is to help you address your deferred maintenance backlog, which we can talk about later because that's a big one, and optimize your budget so that you can make decisions for how to use the potentially limited budgets that schools have to choose what facilities projects you're going to tackle, make sure you're on top of your day-to-day maintenance, and then on top of that, justify your budget, as you said, Wendy, in the beginning, which we can get to again later, but justify your budget without emotions and actual data so that you have facts to prove what you need instead of just opinion, which is key, right? When you're going into those discussions.
Great. Thank you, Katie. I really appreciate that. Ron, I'd love to hear some similar information from you, how you got started, where you are now, and the role within Salto.
And you're on mute.
I'm gonna unmute you, Ron.
You know what? I think I'm just going to get a shirt that says I'm on mute.
Again.
I think I'm
You
just going to
know,
do that. Yeah.
yeah, that'd be a win for me. I'd
Yeah.
be a bestseller. Anyway,
So
welcome, Ron.
so I've been in access control for over 20 years. Started out with the mag stripe technology that was out. And access control is complex, guys. The way it started out with, punch cards, mag stripe, then proximity cards and RFID. Let's understand that cabling gets expensive for access control. And what is the point of access control? A couple of things: it's safety, security, and convenience. And the big one nowadays is accountability. So, what is Salto's claim to fame that we kind of bring to the table is access control without the heavy lift of IT infrastructure, which is Salto allowing access control to be placed on the card at the end instead of the beginning. So instead of wiring controllers and wireless and infrastructure and IP addresses and VLANs, we actually make a smart card smarter. So we encode the information on a card or to a mobile device, and the lock can be placed anywhere without the heavy lift of IT infrastructure because the lock is reading all the information from the card. So think of the evolution of access control to where a controller made all the decisions to now your smartphone or the smart card is making the decisions at the door. So whether that is a package delivery system, an access control device, a lock, a secured narcotics location, Salto pretty much has an access control device for all of that. Again, it's access control without the heavy lift of IT infrastructure so that you have accountability. Everything really today is moving mobile. Why? Something you have, it's protected by biometrics, and you tend never to share the phone where you share the card. My friend may let me borrow the card, probably not going to allow me to borrow the phone for 5 or 6 hours.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting and agreed. Nobody's getting my phone.
Nobody's getting the phone. Too many
Yeah.
swipes. Too many swipes.
Why don't we talk a little bit about that? We kind of talked about the evolution of the technology, Katie, certainly from your space where you started and School Dude, even over to Brightly. What are you seeing as, I guess, where that technology plays now, kind of going hand in hand with data and where we pull that data and what we do with it? How does that connection happen, and how does that help with some of the decisions our facility professionals have to make every day?
Sure. Well, I think where you start is you need condition data, right? So it's usually called the facilities condition assessment. And a long time ago, and still in many schools, that's a large binder that has hundreds of pages of details on every asset in your school. So you're everything from a AC unit to the roof to the whole building. And so an engineering firm will come and charge you a lot of money to do a very detailed facilities condition assessment. Some schools are required to do them, so you don't have a choice. Some are not, depends on if you're private or public and what your districts require. But either way, if you have an official facilities condition assessment or you have your own that you and your staff have created, just knowing what your assets are, the age, the condition, when they're viewed, what do you do with that data? So in the past, you had this binder, and then you would check off when you fixed the things that needed to be fixed, or you'd have a spreadsheet, or if you were good, you'd have a spreadsheet. But now, luckily, we have software that can take that data and keep it up to date for you. So we kind of talk in Brightly about the journey of where you can go, since schools tend to start a little bit behind the curve in terms of facilities technology. So the first thing you do is you take that condition assessment data and you put it in a computerized maintenance management software, a CMMS. So most people have heard of that, but that software will take what you have and it will allow your technicians to then update it as you make changes, as you perform inspections, as you change filters. So everything that you're doing remains up to date in the software program. And then the next level of that data is the budget piece. So we talk about it in two phases. You have the phase of the day-to-day operations, which is the condition assessment, as well as tickets, so work order requests from faculty, staff, students, things that are broken, things that need to get done that you have to address and make sure you do it in a timely manner. And on top of that, then you take all of this information and you go to the next level of software, which is asset investment planning software, or AIP, or sometimes it's called different things, but that's what we refer to it as. And that's taking that financial piece of the budget and adding that to the next level of your facilities. And it can take that information and actually allow you to do budget planning as well as funding scenarios. So you can test out, if I replace this in 5 years, what does that budget look like? If I hold off on 2 years on that because of the estimated life expectancy, can I then put that money somewhere else? And it allows you to make sure you're spending money where you need. I always use the example of, if you're a public school, or if anyone, you report to someone that cares about where you're spending money, you can say, I have to fix this elementary school first. And it's not because my kid goes there. It's because this is the one that needs it. And it gives you that data to back your decision. And then you have less uncomfortable conversations.
You know, Katie, you talked earlier on, and that really brings that point home about this data really takes a lot of the emotion out of it. It really is very clear and actionable. And Ron, I would imagine on the access control side and on the overall security side, it's a topic that gets people somewhat emotional, or at least a little more energized sometimes than others. I'd love to hear how that data piece really works there, specific in the access control side of things, you know, that asset management piece, but also the personal security as well.
So for the asset management and personal security, I would say the biggest challenge that we hear from the industry is the overall day one, day two effect. Hey, we need access control, we need accountability, but it's the overall infrastructure. Just like with HVAC and other things, it's the internet of things. So you have, when we think about access control for accountability, I want to lock on the door, but now it's, I need wireless. And it's the cost of the infrastructure that sometimes challenges that group or stresses that conversation. So how do we do that today, and how has it transformed? It's transformed by the access control and accountability being on the mobile device, for instance, because it's real-time updated. And again, with some of the solutions that Salto has, we're not limited by the wire or the wireless, because the lock is dumb, the card is smart. The credential or the phone is actually telling lock what to do, when to do it, how often to do it. If it's the phone, it's real-time accountability. You can have a 2-person rule for accountability and to get that data back. So, you know, Ron and Aaron both need to be there at 9 o'clock to open this cabinet or to open this location. And that data is real time. That data can be synchronized through a CSV file, through a database synchronization from Oracle to SQL, SQL to SQL. So again, data is the key. No pun intended, but data is the key in the way to open doors. So if we can track and understand what does the day in the life of an employee or a visitor look like, then we can adjust for that remotely with a mobile app. So that way it doesn't stress our concerns about accountability or reliability. So again, think of package delivery. We need that data. Think of storage units. Think of obviously doors, turnstiles, parking garages. All that, the stress is normally, how do we get the ecosystem of the infrastructure in place for the data accountability? Day one, day two effect. This is what we need. The day two effect, how do we manage all that? That's the stress that comes with it. I mean, let's look at real-time monitoring. Let's look at efficiency. That requires facilities, all right? That requires people. That requires an ecosystem to understand where we get in the data and who's managing it. So that, I think that's the stress of the conversation, is we know what we need, but then how do we get it?
Yeah, I will add to that, because you made me think of something. I
Okay,
think
that's good.
exactly what you're doing kind of plays into what we're doing, because you need to also justify in your budget staff, how much staff you have, what they're doing, how many hours are they working, what are they working on. So not only are you in Brightly software, you can track, you know, number of work orders, number of work hours someone has done on something, but you can also utilize access control to see usage of space and see how much people are using specific spaces. Or like you said, how many times have we had a late night event that we had to use all the facilities for? And there's a lot of tracking that can help you justify staff as well, because that's usually, I find that when I used software like Brightly, I needed to use it to help justify how hard my staff was working and show what they were doing so that I could get more staff, not necessarily show someone that they weren't doing what they need. Obviously, sometimes that happens, but the better use case is that you're showing how much your staff is doing, how much your space is being utilized, how much is happening, and what can you do. How can you use that for funding? Because that's a whole other budget. Staffing budget's even another bucket of money you need to hopefully get some from.
So that kind of triggered me to just to kind of, it's justification. I mean,
Yep.
data helps you justify the means what you need. So let's say if you need to justify activity or inactivity, the data coming from access control management can justify the number of people that come in on a day-to-day basis. Maybe a certain time a month, the amount of people that do not come into the office because of childcare, because of school issues, whatever that is, that data helps you justify the cause of access control, or a system that can track and analyze your day-to-day needs, monthly needs, whatever that is. That's pretty much, the data is the key.
I've actually I heard this recently, and maybe Ron, you've heard this, people using sensors for doors to track inventory, so they would know, like, okay, a certain number of people have used this bathroom, so we should check the supplies on that bathroom. Have you ever heard something like
Absolutely.
that? Yeah.
Absolutely. We actually have a feature in the system to where it can be automated that, once a certain number of audits or activities trigger a report, that report, maybe it goes to the facilities or to the maintenance department to say, hey, there have been 200 users in this particular area today, between this time range. And at that point, maybe you can now officially send a cleaner out to that
It's just that
location
you probably
to
need to
check it.
clean it.
You may need to clean it. You may need
Yeah.
to clean it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that automation piece is so interesting because it speaks to, in either of these instances, where your technology is, but then there are, I don't know how to say, ancillary or secondary uses. Again, not just for the data, as you were talking about. We're going from, tracking expenses and staffing all the way over to grant writing. And in the case, Ron, of what you were saying, we're tracking access in and out of a bathroom facility, but that speaks to the maintenance and supply side of things. So this holistic approach is really very interesting. And I don't think it happens without this level of technology. Can we speak to like that? Is it an asset management piece at this point? Is that conversation that strategic asset management side of things, Katie? Is that where you see kind of the future?
Yeah, I would say yes, because the term strategic asset management is really long-term planning ahead of what you're in schools. It's called a capital plan, but it's essentially your long-term budget of what you will be prioritizing over a long term of years. So in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, and being able to figure out what's critical now, what's the low hanging fruit, what's the expensive, but we have to do it now because it's a safety issue. The school's going to get shut down because we don't have heat. There's those priority issues that you need to budget for. And then what's your long-term goal in advance? So not only are you planning your budget, but I think the other thing you're really planning is how you can get ahead of it. So how you can get ahead of those spends by where you start first is, like I said, your predictive maintenance, your preventive maintenance. And in order for your equipment to last a long time, you need to do the normal maintenance on it. With your car, if you don't change your oil when you're supposed to, your car is not going to last as long. And if you're already behind the 8 ball on that list of just the regular maintenance on all of your assets, you're not doing strategic asset management, you're doing catch up asset management. And so that's what it's the deferred maintenance backlog we at Brightly talk about all the time. But the term is, unfortunately, it's a popular one in schools because it's happening all the time. Not enough people to do the work, not enough money to do the work, and you're dealing with the operations of day to day. So you can't necessarily handle all the other things that are on your list, your ongoing list. And I will say, I'll let Ron jump in here because I think this also will lead to you, is if you have technology observing your everyday, alerting your staff to the needs of your everyday, then you're being more efficient. Then you're able to actually use the staff to do that day-to-day preventative maintenance and extend your asset life, because your staff isn't just plugging holes. I always think of that Donald Duck cartoon where he plugs one hole and then the other
Oh
one,
yeah.
yeah, I think of that. So if you're actually able to do your preventive maintenance because you're getting alerts from technology, you're not constantly checking things, that will just help you in the long run.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm thinking about too. You know, right away, Ron, you were talking about some of these updates to how access control can work thanks to the technology, you know, dumb, smart, locks, phones. Let's talk a little bit about the modernizing of those access control systems. You know, where are those efficiencies happening for the facility staff?
I'm gonna piggyback off what she said. Observing
Yeah.
your day to day. I love that term. I love that word, because if you observe your day to day, you can have triggers or automations,
Okay.
and to be more efficient with the level of batteries, lockouts, the quantity of people that are in the room. How's that changed? Let me go back to your question. So traditional access control that everyone knows is normally either wired or wireless. So that means to put the infrastructure in, I have that. Where it's transitioning to is security and convenience by having it on a mobile device. With that, think of integration with point of sale systems, to where my point of sale, I come in the building that day, then I'm authorized for my meal plan for the day. Um, if I'm not in the area, then I'm not authorized for the meal plan for that day. The sharing of credentials, you know, you're optimized now. Instead of just handing my card over to my buddy to go get a meal today, again, I said this earlier, you're probably not going to share that credential. So in and of itself, you've got efficiencies. And here's the one I like. If you're using our product, which is a Salto-based solution, and you happen to put a non-wired or wireless access control device somewhere, the people are doing the work. The more the card or the phone is used, it's collecting, again, back to data. It's collecting data. It's sending low battery reports. It's sending cancellations out. It's spreading a virtual update to those areas without the heavy lift of IT infrastructure. What they're trying to do today is to be more efficient with where we need access control based on the data, the wiring, all the connections, the IP addresses. If we can be more efficient with the data we're getting back, then that solves our case or justification as to why we need these type of resources in the areas. And again, I think it was said earlier, if Salto allows you to manage the users versus the doors, if I can manage the users and I understand the day-to-day data, where they're going in and out of, then that in and of itself mitigates a lot of risk and a lot of loss.
Mm-hmm.
And
And actually, sorry, can I jump in?
no, don't be sorry. Hit it.
As you were talking, I was thinking about, I'm sure you worked in a lot of schools too. Schools specifically, like we said, are sometimes technology averse and have a fear of technology. And if there's a culture shift, which takes time, but
Mhm.
towards utilizing, like you said, your phones, your some sort of device for that culture, it is so much more efficient. So if you have a work order ticketing system like Brightly, then you could literally put QR codes in your bathroom and the person can scan the QR code and put in their ticket that says this stall door is broken. And that just saves everyone time. And it's the same general idea. And if the culture is you need this phone for your lunch, you need this phone to clock in, you need this for
Absolutely.
whatever it is, then the culture is that. And that would help in general with all the technology.
Just to piggyback off of what you said, and with Salto, as we're getting those reports back, a system like Brightly, we could export that in a CSV file to where that can be ingested. So now you've got two solutions, one integration that is allowing you
Yep.
to be more efficient based again on the usage to justify, you know, the resources we need in that area. Or the big one, accountability. You know, this
Mm-hmm.
was damaged in this area.
Yeah.
This is missing. Who was accountable? Is it a two-person rule? You can put that in a webhook or a CSV file and share that data with multiple third-party systems so that everyone's in the loop.
And as a facilities operations director, I was always in charge of safety and security. It happens a lot in schools. There's not two people unless you have like extra money. And like you said, that accountability of I always would have to pull up the footage of what happened, who was there, and there might not be a
Mhm.
camera there. There might not. You can't have cameras everywhere. And so having access control would allow you not only to see for security reasons, but it also helps you protect your staff and say they did come to your classroom to fix that thing. You weren't there. They did, you know what I mean? So you have that as well, which is really helpful on both sides.
That's a proactive approach because there's
Yeah.
always three ways to be with what we're talking about. It's either you're proactive, you're reactive, or you're inactive. And I love the proactive approach because data allows you to be proactive. Without the data, you're always behind the eight ball. You're reactive. And then if you don't look at the data, you're just inactive. So absolutely.
Agreed.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that. I think you're already starting to talk about the culture, and with that, I'm starting to think about language, and some of that comes into how you were talking about this data with the decision makers within the team, either on the financial, the budget side, or even on just the acquisition of technology side. And it sounds like data is really important, what you get, but it also sounds like you want to make sure you promote that understanding of this is very sophisticated information that has so many different points of value within the organization. Have you seen any examples of successfully being able to really speak to it? I mean, proactive, reactive, and inactive, that boils it right down. How else can we talk about this in terms of getting that buy-in from the decision-making side of things, using this technology and the data? I'm going to throw it up like a basketball and see which one of you guys wins the tip on that one.
I'll let her kick it off. I
All
seem to
right.
play very
I
well off
think
her, so go for it.
thanks,
I
Ron.
play good off of Katie. Go for it.
I think that you touched on it, Ron, a little bit, which is whenever you have to present something that you want to buy essentially from your decision maker, the more people that have input and get something out of it, the better. The more you'll be able to justify getting it and that spend, and what does that look like? And so something that is holistic in its approach that affects multiple different things. So we've talked about it, safety and security, but also facilities management. Those two things are two different things, but are holistically the same idea. But if you're at a school, I always like to think of how does it affect the students? Because if someone is paying the bill, they care about the students. That's what they care about. That's what a school is for. So realistically, the safety and security is an obvious one for the students, but the facilities all plays into that as well. So not just secure, but clean, efficient. We have stats, everyone has their stats that they say all the time about how better learning environments get better test scores. So if your maintenance staff is on the ball and the classrooms aren't super hot and the AC isn't breaking all the time, the kids will do better in school. It's logistically and just logically, it makes sense. But when you're actually putting it out there and proving it with data, that's what really makes sense to someone that has to pay a large bill. So that's how I always try to do that. And like you said, Ron, I think the more people realize the use cases that aren't necessarily the obvious ones. So the obvious one is, okay, someone went in this door and we don't want that door open right now. Great. Or the use case is someone wants to quickly tell me I need to come fix this light bulb. Great. Those are the obvious ones. But when you think outside the box of how else they can be used and who else becomes a stakeholder in this process, that really helps you justify it to the people that would be purchasing something like that. Because even events management, we do have an event management software, but events totally works with access control as well, getting things open on time, making sure we know how many people came to an event, making sure we know if we're expecting a certain number of people, are we going over that? And then I'll throw in one more thing because I want Ron to talk about this, because I was going to ask you a question, is sustainability is a huge thing. And so in terms of sustainability, obviously you can have, lighting control timers, motion sensors. So the lights go off and they're not wasting energy. But how are you using that data to make sure you're doing the best you can for your community? And there's always a buy-in on that where people want to see what you've done. You say you're being sustainable, prove it. other than just saying you are. And so if you have software that can show you that data and say, we've cut our energy in half and we can show you that, how did we do it? Well, we did it because we were able to track that no one's in this room from Monday to Thursday. So we just leave it closed and we turn off the AC and figuring things like that.
Absolutely. So three of the key things that you stated: stakeholders, buy-in, sustainability, they all go hand in hand. So how do we show that? Again, back to the data. If I'm using access control report to trigger work orders, now I'm more efficient. Instead of just saying, hey, once a month, let's go change out all the air filters in this area. Well, let's look at the data. How many people were in that area this month? One. Do we really need to go and change the air filters? Well, okay, we have the lights on the timer. How long do they stay on? 8 hours a day. Let's look at the access control data. Well, we only had 5 meetings in there, 2 people in each meeting.
I stopped hearing Ron.
I did as well. Hey, Ron, hold on one sec. For some reason, we've lost a little audio with you, and we want to make sure we talk a little bit more about that data. I'm going to see what we can see here. Well, give us a testing, 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
There it is.
Am I back?
You
Yes.
are back. So I hope you can hop right back into those data pieces. We were really kind of walking through those case examples of where that data becomes available and how to integrate.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I think I faded out or something happened. I'm not really for sure where I faded out, but I think I was just saying with the data, you can show use cases and areas to
Yes.
kind of show what you need or justify maybe what you don't need.
Yeah, and I really like this, how the data doesn't necessarily drive every single decision all the way. It informs the decisions. It
Yes.
really helps create a very specific case-by-case opportunity for, like you were saying, Katie, a school versus a healthcare facility versus an office building. No one is like the other. So I really appreciate the almost specificity and customization that comes with this data access. It's fantastic. I'm gonna give everybody a minute to take a breather because we've had a couple questions come in. One, I think Ron is gonna go right to you, and the second one, we're gonna start with you and then jeter to Katie. So somebody was asking specifically about the access control remote applications, and he's actually asking about distance, like how far really distance to unlocking doors. I know we're getting a little technical here, but let's talk a little bit about how the technology works and integrates with the lock, and from a remote or wireless position, what that means for distance.
Okay. And I want to make sure you guys can hear me, right?
Thumbs up.
Okay, just checking. So that's great. So again, traditional access control, you're limited by the wire and the wireless.
Yeah.
It's also, we have wired and wireless, but we also have wire free. Think about traditional access control to where you're taking a static card with facility code and a card number, and you're enrolling it to a system that has to verify through a controller or a piece of software on a network. So you are unbound by that if you make the card smarter and you have dynamic data that exchanges and updates every time you use it. So if that access control device is in the middle of a cornfield, I like to use, and it knows which questions to ask from the credential that's dynamic, now the credential becomes a smart updating solution, kind of like saying, hey, I'm presenting the card and the lock is saying, who are you? Great, you come from the database. Do you have access to me? Yep, your code is AC7531. Do you have access between these times? The card verifies it, and then the lock writes back its health score. Hey, my batteries are at 20%. Also, the card would write back and say 20 people have been canceled today, so take that in your memory and go from there. Now take that same concept and you place it on a mobile device that is always connected to where it's connected with mobile or Wi-Fi, and now the lock becomes real-time communicating based on the triggered action at that point. So to answer your question, it's limitless at that point when you are able to make the credential smart instead of the access control device.
And there sounds like there's a lot of flexibility there. So the
Absolutely.
follow-up, and the follow-up question to this is somebody was asking about, like, so with that mobile phone component, they're saying, do you see mobile phones being able to function similar to occupancy sensors to be able to control air conditioning, lighting in a room? In other words, we may soon be able to instead take data on a number of mobile phones, and the number of phones equals the number of occupants, and then you're starting to get a whole nother facet of data from that. So I don't know how much of that is future state. Ron, feel free to weigh in, and then Katie, I'm
Sure.
not sure if that's something that goes around the halls at Brightly as well.
So with that, we already do that today with some of our partners. So in order to trigger lights or HVAC and other things, you can actually set a mobile device to give different commands, even a physical card. So let's say an alarm event, which is I present my card for the day at 8 a.m. Do the following: turn on the lights through a relay trigger and disable the alarm system, because I'm showing my card and it has that information coded on it. Whereas if Katie comes in, yes, she can unlock the front door, but she's not supposed to be there at 8 o'clock. So that means the lights don't turn on, the alarm is not disabled, and the HVAC is still set in an energy savings mode. So to answer your question, you can use a physical card or a mobile credential to trigger the same, we call them alarm events or if-then equations based on the user. Remember, we want to manage the user instead of the door, because the doors is the infrastructure, and that's what's going to cost us. The people move. So if I can manage the access control and the triggering of events through the movement of people, then I'm more efficient at that point. Because if Katie's not in that area, why do we need to have the AC at 70? Why do we need to have the lights on at that point? And do we really need cleaning? Because there were no meetings today. So yes.
And then you could, and I'm not sales, but I'll just throw it out there because I love sustainability. If you had something like our energy manager, then you have a software that's tracking that you've improved your use of energy, and you have a dashboard to show your board of ed, your parents that are paying tuition, and you say, look at how much we've cut our energy use by using these new sensors, by using this, and that helps you get funding to do things like this. And that leads to a callback from earlier, grant funding. Which
That's
is,
right.
if that's something you want, if that's something you like to have, or you can have, or you've heard of grants, I've been talking a lot about the Renew America School Grant, because that's a huge one for sustainability efforts for schools and facilities. But it kind of is it's like a what comes first, the chicken or the egg. You have to, one, know what you need, but to get the grant, you also have to have data to prove that you should have the grant. And so that you could potentially get the grant for Brightly software or Salto to help you, but you have to prove why that would do what the grant is providing, which is, if it's a sustainability grant, obviously it would show you that you could reduce your energy costs with this. You could prove that. And then having the data, let's say you already have Asset Essentials and Salto and you're all set, you can use our data to get other grants. So then you have our data to show you, okay, all of these assets are failing constantly. I already have all the data to prove it. Grant applications are a huge pain in the butt. And so, excuse me, but they are, and they're very detailed, and they want so much information that if you already have it, you can do it a lot faster and send that application in and hopefully get approved to get something else that you need on your list. It's a very long list.
Yeah, that justification right there. And I always use that term, Katie. I love that you said that. The justification will equal the execution of the application, and that all comes from the data. If you have the data, then it flows smoothly. If you can't justify that, it's really hard to execute that application of whatever you're trying to get.
Yep. And if you already have it, it saves you a lot of time, because it's very time consuming to collect that data for one random grant application that if you already have it, done, send it. And sometimes if you're in a larger school, you have grant managers and development officers that do it, but they're going to come to you and ask for it. So you might as well already have it. Yeah.
The data will trigger that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm going to remind everybody on the call, first of all, thank you for those questions. Keep them coming. We've got a little more time with Katie and with Ron. But my question now comes to, you're talking really about now we've got the data, we've got the information, we're going to apply it and use it somewhere. Talk to me about who and how we get people kind of connected to this part of the process. How do you bring teams into this space? Who on the facility side should start this process and lead it? And do you have, Ron, in your view, is there a script a facility enterprise should follow when they start to integrate these kinds of technologies into their space?
I wouldn't say so much of a script as I like to open every conversation when we talk about data and access control. The number one thing I like to ask is, what are we trying to accomplish? What are we solving for? And then the conversation will point itself. Sometimes it's accountability, sometimes it's security, but I've been in certain K through 12 schools where it's just, no, we just want convenience. Well, what do you mean convenience? Well, we have a teacher with 7 keys on the ring, and they sit at the door and they do this, and it's frustrating. We just want a convenient application, such as a mobile app, so that they can pull it out, they're in, we know they're in, triggers the lights, triggers the AC. We know to send security over there at 7 o'clock in the morning to make sure that Katie is okay, because we can see the data coming in on our third-party system. So again, start the conversation with a simple script. What are we trying to accomplish? Security, is it convenience? What are we looking for? And that'll trigger the conversation.
And I can't tell you how many times a teacher set off our alarm, which you get fined for, by the way, if it's a false alarm, because they didn't tell us they had to come in at 6 a.m. and we weren't prepared because the school opened at 7 a.m. or whatever that is. And so the connection of that, as well as the connection of, usually, at least at my schools, they would email facilities and say, I'm coming in at 6 a.m. And then what do? If you have access control, you have a software, you have all this stuff holistically solving that problem. You have the ticket that you can check off that you did. You have the software that you can say, Ron's coming in at 6 a.m. Let's let him in and not set off the alarms. Exactly. Then you're done.
Yeah, it's alarm event management. That really is. It's a trigger to say, again, Ron's coming in at 8. Yeah. What do we do when Ron's phone or card is shown? Number 1, turn off the alarm. Number 2, take the thermostats out of the setback mode. 3, allow the light switches to work. So when Ron comes in, he can turn on the lights. Again, that's really being efficient at that point with the data that you already have.
Right. Right. Absolutely. When it comes to, again, that team that we were just talking about and who's there and who isn't, where do people go once this system is in place? Let's talk a little bit about the training. Let's talk a little bit just about the orientation that happens. I do think for a lot of the facilities community, there's an absolute understanding and maybe not a warm hug yet, but the embrace of technology is here. That said, sometimes there are more questions on those front ends. So is there a way in the training aspect or the, just kind of the onboarding that you guys feel can be the most successful way for people to get up and running with this stuff? Katie, what have you seen?
I think the most important part is a smooth integration and training, because once people make their minds up about something that it's too hard or they don't want to do it, it's really hard to come back from that. Yeah. So it's really key to start with very clear instructions and leveled tiers of what you need to know. You know what I mean? So you have your administrator who will be whoever that person is, who's in charge of the back end of the software and doing the more complicated tasks. It's hopefully a computer savvy person. But other than that, you also have all your users, you have your staff users, and then you have like your maintenance staff users, at least for a work order system like Brightly's. And then you have your larger community, whether that's students and faculty and staff, whether that's parents, whether that's government. So it's everyone who enters your building. You have that training piece too. Hopefully that's the simplest one. You download an app, you scan a QR code, you're the client essentially for the app. So that should be the simplest. It's that middle level that's the hardest. It's the day-to-day facility staff that has to use it in their work. And the only way that I've found is most successful is showing how with the training up front, which hopefully is simple and easy to do, and you have ongoing support, like Brightly offers ongoing support with broadcasts and things like that. I'm sure Ron does the same thing. But what you have is making sure that staff sees the value after they're after their upfront training, like what's their return on investment? Their return on investment, their investment of their time to learn it, is that then they can show how much work they're doing. They can show that they're being asked to do something that's not physically possible because they can't be in two buildings at one time, and you want this both done at the same time. You have all this data for them to show, you thought this project would take me 2 hours, but here's how I tracked it on my phone and it took me 5 hours. So it's not that I didn't get to my list, it's that this project took a lot longer than we thought it would. So for me, it's that PR piece of it's actually helping you, because there's always that stigma of I'm being tracked. I'm being tracked so that you can say I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. And that's the feedback you get a lot. And you have to explain it as it's not that. It's that you're being tracked to support you, to show how much you are doing, to show how what you're doing actually takes and what the bandwidth is that you're being asked to do, rather than someone's assumption that we only need 2 people in this building because it's a small building. And what you don't know is this HVAC unit breaks literally every day. So we need someone that just sits there. Like, and so that sort of justification to help your staff, it's a lot of PR that helps.
It really flips the script though. I don't think until you actually provided those concrete examples, I hadn't even thought about that component of it. It's fascinating. Ron, it sounds like there's an opportunity on the same side, you know, with the Salto piece as well, to really utilize that in a way to help empower the staff to make those decisions or to be impactful in making some of those decisions.
Absolutely. And I like to play off Katie, what she said. I like the KISS method. We all know what that stands for, you know, keep it simple and make your process intuitive. All right. It doesn't need to be rocket science. Okay. You need to understand the data again. What do I have? What am I trying to accomplish? And then what tools do I need? So I try and take the word tracking out of it. It's a little taboo in this industry, you know, tracking, woo, what are you doing? Or I'm providing you efficient data to maximize what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, whatever that is, you and your team. And if I can get that data back, hey, guess what, guys? You don't need to go to building 7 today. We're looking at the data. No one goes over there on Wednesdays. You know, I want to make you more efficient at that point. So I try and change it from tracking to efficiency. You know, do you really need to do this task today based on the data or the analytics that we have back from this system? And if so, can it be fed into a system like Brightly to trigger different notifications of work orders and different things like that? So that maybe this week, instead of having 7 people in the office, we only need 3. You know, different things like that, the data that you already have. So again, keep it simple, make it intuitive, everyone becomes efficient.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I really, really appreciate this, because to me, that PR piece and the flipping the script and Kismet and just basic overall communications, you know, I think that's one of the things that we see sometimes. People make an assumption that if it's technology, that communication piece maybe takes a back seat, but here it sounds like it's an absolute, you know, it's a co-pilot.
Absolutely.
What I'm going to do is read one more question that's come in. Let everybody know we're coming towards the end of our conversation. So if you have a question you've been holding back, not the time anymore, ask your questions. Otherwise, Katie, I'm going to ask this from you, and I'd like to see, you know, what your thoughts are on it. It's about highly like optimizing this whole process. What data and information do you find is the most valuable to have in a maintenance technology system? What do you want to see in a highly effective system, and what do you expect it to give you?
It's a really good question. Good one. I would say, I mean, there are a lot of CMMS softwares out there. There's a lot. And like I said, I'm not sales. I'm just someone that has used one and knows what I like. And so, yes, you have your maintenance data, you have your asset data, you have how old the asset is, what's the expected life expectancy on it based on standardized norms, and different software use different things to decide that. You can see the condition of it based upon how much work has gone into it, what's happening, what's failing often. So that is all very important data that most CMMS will give you. What I think is the next level technology is that asset investment planning piece and having it tie into that. So you can get a CMMS and you can use Brightly's, it's called Origin for schools, but the asset investment planning software. And you can use someone else's CMMS and tie it to our Origin. But what it really helps is that if you have something that all goes together, you're going to take that data, you know it's correct, you know it's the right data that you need, and then you'll be able to add, like I said, that funding scenarios, that long-term planning, because that's what's really hard. Because if you just have a CMMS, it's great. You can say, okay, this boiler is going to fail in 5 years. So then you can bid it out with your vendors and you can know, okay, it's probably going to cost me this amount of money and this is my approximate cost. But what you're not getting is potentially what's the cost in your area? What's the cost that might change in 5 years? What's the possibility that we're not going on industry standards? So what if, like, I could go back to the cars because I know nothing about cars. If the guy at the car dealership tells me it's going to cost a certain amount of money, I just say yes because I don't know anything about cars. And so if this gives you a benchmark to actually make sure you're getting what the price probably should be for that asset, so you can plan in advance, and then also allowing you to test different scenarios. So you can say, I'm going to plan this for 5 years, but if this happens and I have to change my plan, which we all know if we own a house, it happens all the time, then what am I going to switch in my budget? And really adding that financial piece is the next level. And when I was in schools, you know, you have your CFO, your superintendent, whoever, they come to you and they say, Katie, what do I need to budget for next year? What's going to fall apart? What should I prioritize? And if you don't have asset investment planning, then all you're doing is guessing based upon vendors and your innate knowledge of your equipment, which is okay, but you don't have the data to justify it. It's more of an opinion. It's my vendor says this is going to break. I think it's going to break because it always breaks, but you don't have that data to prove it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's that accountability,
Yeah.
right?
Accountability.
Different
It's
kind of
all about accountability. Yep.
Yeah. All right. I'm not seeing too many more questions come in that, in fact, I'm not seeing any more questions come in. I'll be specific. And with that in mind, I think to me that says we have really covered a lot of ground here today. I don't think we're quite done. So what I'd like to do is, Ron and Katie, I'd like to ask you both just to offer maybe a primary or a key takeaway that our audience can take with them as they look ahead. You know, they're looking to, if you're in a school district right now, school's starting soon. So a lot of these things I imagine are swirling around you, and security is certainly, and access control is a year-round issue. So let's give a takeaway that our attendees can use today and start their process of really making sure that their maintenance technology and their access control technology is where it should be. Katie, would you like to start?
Sure. I think the takeaway that I like to say is that it all sounds super overwhelming right now. I'm sure if you have none of this, you're probably very overwhelmed and thinking, well, I don't even have time to do what I have to do every day. How am I ever going to do all of this? And so for me, it's knowing that it's a journey, and and that sounds, sounds cliche, but it is. It's one step at a time. What's the first step you can do, and where can you start? So if you don't have any condition data, or you have a super old dusty FCA sitting on a shelf in a binder, start there and make sure you have accurate data from what you have today, because that in itself is a project. If you have money, you can hire someone to do it. If you don't, you and your staff will have to do it. And then going from there, how do you keep it up to date? Well, the return on investment of that is if you have a software that information is put in, the CMMS, then once it's done, it's done. Then as your team is working and changing things and updating things, it is constantly updated, and you will never have to do that huge data collection at the beginning ever again. So it is worth it to take that big first step, even if it's a little scary, because then you've got your PM set, you've got your plan ready to go. And when you're ready to take it to the next level of asset investment, you'll be ready. You might not be ready for 5 years, but you'll be ready for it.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Ron, you're our closer. Bring it home.
I'm going to make mine super simple.
Okay.
I'd like to leave it with whatever access control technology you choose, whether it's Salto or another third party. Understand what you're trying to accomplish, number one. Understand the technology lift that you're going to need to face and its challenges, whether that's a physical card or a mobile credential. And then last but not least, understand its effectiveness with the data that you receive and how intuitive is it for your population to understand, to digest, and to use. Because it can be a great solution on paper, but if it's not intuitive, I think Katie said it earlier, it's now a technology challenge for me and my staff, and I don't want to do it. I'm not comfortable. I'm going to revert back to my old ways of doing things. In our world, it's the old physical keys versus the new phone. And if it's too complex for me to get the card encoded or to use the mobile, then I'm going to go back to finding a keyway that I can just put in with no accountability and no reliability when there's an emergency situation. So whatever you choose, understand what you're trying to accomplish and your technology challenges, as well as the environment and the IT infrastructure.
I think that's a wonderful way to wrap up our conversation today. I want to thank you both, Katie and Ron, for your insight and expertise. I really appreciate the fact that while we are talking about technology and some very cutting edge technology, really harnessing internet and harnessing wireless and harnessing everything that's on the bleeding edge of our universe these days, the pulling it back into the people side of things, I think should be something that our attendees take with them moving forward. You've got what it takes from your, from your team side, as long as there's a understanding of what the goal is, what we're trying to accomplish, using the data in a way to keep the emotion out of it and the benefit facing everybody. I think we've really delivered a wonderful set of, I guess, observations for people to take with them. So thank you. And
Absolutely.
To our audience today, thank you for being a part of this event. You will be receiving an email later today with a link to those CEU questions. You'll also be receiving a link to the archive, as well as that information from, again, from the CEU. So I want to finally thank our sponsors, Brightly and Salto, for their support of this conversation and the event in general. With that, I'm going to wrap things up and wish everybody a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks again for attending.
Thanks, Wendy.